Welcome to Born in June, Raised in April, What Adoption Can Teach the World. I'm your host, April Dinwoodie. I'm so excited to be here in the heart of Harlem at Ginny's Supper Club. It's November. As many of our listeners know, we deconstruct the calendar on this podcast, having been named June by my birth mother and April by my adoptive parents. One of the ways that I can experience this life is by taking it one moment at a time. So I take 1 month at a time. And since we're in November, there's two big things in November that happen. Thanksgiving, which is sort of the centerpiece of family holidays, and it's also National Adoption Month. National Adoption Month became National Adoption Month under the Clinton administration to highlight the need for adoptive families for the over 100,000 children in foster care. Since then, the month has become a time where the voices of the extended family of adoption can be heard, and I'm so excited to be with this family here in Harlem today. Marcus Samuelsson, restaurateur, author, chef, award-winning, all of those things.
Thank you for being here, April.
Transracially adopted person.
Yeah.
And then Louis Johnson Jr., who is the style icon for Harlem Haberdashery. He is the Accessory King, and he is the co-founder of the League of Distinguished Gentlemen.
Thank you.
And we're here at this table because in an effort to expand this podcast, I had a conversation with Lou about ideas that I had and people that I wanted to interview. And on that list, of course, the top was Marcus. And, Louis said to me very matter-of-factly and very I have never really had a conversation with Marcus about adoption or anything related to it. So I would love to be a part of this. So the inspiration for us all to be at the table here and for me to pass the mic, if you will, for a part of this conversation to Lou is his curiosity about some of the experiences his brother from another mother, Marcus, right, has had in this lifetime. So we're so honored that we're able to have this conversation with some of our Harlem family here with us. So I'm gonna kick it over to Lou to start the conversation.
All right, well, thank you, April, for bringing this conversation to life and for giving me the honor to actually get this chance to sit back with my pal, because everybody knows I call Marcus my pal. So I can tell him everything, that's my pal. If I can tell him my secrets, that's my pal. So this is something that was absolutely an honor to be asked and to actually be considered to do this with Marcus and for you to actually sit back and say, yo, let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it.
I'll never forget when you came to the door. He's like, let's do it. So here we are, we're about to start. So everybody ready?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right, so here we go.
I felt the drum roll.
Okay, so it is important to acknowledge that all of us have a beginning and a backstory to life for some of us. Our beginnings are more challenging than others. So what do you know about your beginnings? Is my first question for you.
Well, I think that for me, when you're adopted, it's almost maybe also being an adopter trans race, it almost becomes clearer in a way that, when a lot of people adopt within the race, those questions that is always surrounding adoption maybe comes out later. For us, as the Black kids in the white family, it came out clear early on, right? And identity, I think, is something we all search for, whether you adopt or not. And growing up is hard for everybody and awkward, right? But I learned about my birth mother more as an adult, as an early 20s, late teens, or early 20s. And it was really my sister that drove me to find out more and more and more. And what I found out was that she was an incredibly strong woman that walked us. We had tuberculosis, me, my sister, my mother. She was severely ill, but she walked us from our village into the capital of Addis Ababa, which was a long walk that would happen over days. And I've always wondered, what did we eat during that trip, right? Okay. I know that we ate at nighttime when it wasn't as hot. I knew that she brought dried food with her because that was the easiest thing to carry around. And then eventually she found a Swedish hospital. And once we got to the Swedish hospital, she passed away, but my sister and I survived. And, the story doesn't really stop there. That there was a nurse there that had 3 kids, single mother. She took us into her home. Okay. And she said, I'm going to take care of these kids until an adoption agency will adopt them. So that tells you a lot of things, right? Like you're still in the presence of, you need luck, you need goodness of others, right? Mm-hmm. And that random combination of that, it was for my Swedish family, a tragedy somewhere that they couldn't have kids, right? Cool. That combination between we being sick, otherwise we wouldn't have been up for adoption. My Swedish parents, one, desired to have more kids, couldn't have it. The nurse helping out, and my mom, her desire and drive to get us to the hospital. I mean, that is an incredible amount of stuff to happen, to all be aligned in one way in order for me to be at this table with you in April. So I wake up with that, I think about that, and I think a lot of my drive and my push through come from that.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. So we all know about the importance and challenging relationships with family can be. How would you describe your connection you have with your sister? Like, how was your relationship? Has it changed? Has it grown?
I mean, I love both my sisters dearly. Linda and I, we grew up, we were born in the same household. And Anna is our older sister. We grew up with her. They're very, very different. Mm-hmm. Linda and I were very close. But I never really went into this like, you're my adopted sister, you're not. Like, for me, it's all one family. Okay. And that's how we were raised, Just as much as I never thought about these are my adopted parents and this is my family in Ethiopia. Like, these are my parents. And so I think that came a lot from our parents, right? They really never separated us or dealt with us differently. And then, my sister gave me so much. They're very different people. They live a very sort of like suburban Swedish life, but I also appreciate them because they're very consistent in their on their day to day. If I call them right now, I know, okay, it's 6:00 in Sweden. I know what's happening. Do you know what I mean?
Okay, interesting. So, I have another question. It says, can you tell me about your connection to your extended family? Mm-hmm. Do you have any?
Oh, absolutely. It was actually my sister Linda that really searched for us. And I always been, since I was 17, I've just been busy working so hard and traveling and working. Mm-hmm. And my sister was more like, no, we have to find our birth father because if there's a chance that he's around, alive, we should find him. And I'm like, great. But I didn't really put too much to it. Mm-hmm. And then when I was like 23, 24, she's like, guess what? I found him. And it was, again, a bunch of random things that happened. It was the woman that helped us with the adoption. She was about to retire. Linda got a hold of her basically 3 months before she retired. Oh. And like, she didn't want to send the papers until she retired. That's how much stigma and stuff that could happen, right? Because once you signed off on that, you're not really supposed to contact the family again. It's all this stuff. So we got the papers, and then, this is not adoption from Sweden to Norway. This was from Ethiopia and the countryside of Ethiopia to Sweden, right? So birth certificates, all of these different things that we take for granted might be viewed, and also like you put 30 years, 25 years on it, it's very, very different. Mm-hmm. But anyway, I remember the day when my sister and I went down to meet my father, and it was an incredible day, we drove for a while, and then all of a sudden we went off the dirt road into even more rougher road. And then we come into this village where you have those, when you think about the savannah of Africa, you think about the red clay, you think about these homes that are really built, these huts that are built with clay mixed with a lot of different materials, right? That was it. That's where I was born. Boom. And I see this man in his 70s, but he has this long gray hair. Uh-oh. And I'm like, the first thing I said, okay, I'm not gonna be bald.
Correct.
Knew that. And then I also knew that it was him because his walk, you know, like I bent over a little bit with my shoulder and he walked exactly the same way.
Okay.
So those things were the first
Does
thing.
he have that bop?
Oh no, he
bop.
had that. He does have that.
Okay.
But I was like, he also had enormous amount of strength. Like he was so strong. So it just like I felt good, although we couldn't communicate through the same language. There was a deep connection there almost right away for me and my sister.
Okay.
I love that. So
What about you, April?
What about me? I'm taking this all in because I didn't have the opportunity to meet my birth mother, and I don't know where my birth father is. And so I did meet siblings, but even in the pictures that I see of my birth mother, we have the same feet.
Yeah.
We
Interesting.
have the same mannerisms. And my nephew, my biological nephew, saw me when he first saw me. He apologized soon after because he said, April, I cannot stop looking at you because you so remind me of Tutu, which is Hawaiian for grandmother. And he misses her so much, and he sees so much of me in her, that recognition, even that mirror, which is once removed, is such a palpable and powerful thing for us who've never really had mirrors, or if we've had, you had your sister as a mirror, but so it's powerful. And I think the whole idea around illuminating these conversations is that I think the work that we've done in search of our identity is work that everybody should do.
Yeah.
Right? And then that elevates just our own existence on some level. And it helps us to be in better connection with the world and with ourselves.
But
right?
I think adoption, you know, every family structure allows you, is a gift that is very much belongs to that family and is very different, right?
That's right.
You can't really, not one family is alike. You know, the structure of one family is alike, but it is a family. So people always ask me about how is it like to be a black kid being raised by white parents. I'm like, that was the least of the challenge. You know what I mean? Like I feared my mother, not because she was white, because she was my mother.
That's right.
You know what I mean? I had this like healthy respect for my dad, but I was also in awe of my father, and it had nothing to do with his color of his skin, but like they were consistent individuals in my life all the way to the end, in coaching, in guidance, sometimes being in front of me, sometimes being next to me, sometimes being behind me, guiding me. And race didn't come in till much, much later because I was just so appreciative always to be able to go to my parents and have advice. You know, when I wanted to ask about cooking, like they couldn't help me about cooking, but they could give me, you know, professional advice about what to do, right? Like my father helped me get to Japan as a 17-year-old. Like think about it, you're a black kid, you're going to Japan. There's not a lot of kids that get those opportunities, but we had to work hard as a family, and it took us a year to get there, right? But he kind of talked about a race, but more from 30,000 feet. He was more like, your names need to be international because I don't think when you're 20 that you might live in Sweden. Those was his way of dealing with being black kids in Sweden. Or he's like, you're 8, and he's like, this week is English week in the house. And I'm like, what? Everybody, you have your friend Johan like picking his nose and playing soccer, speaking in Swedish. No, for this whole week we speak in English in the house. And it's like my kids, my friends were like, we don't want to come to your house. We don't want to speak English. We want to speak Swedish. My dad set out like, no, you guys need to practice your English. The English needs to be above the average because I don't think you guys are going to live here. And you know, when you're 9, you don't really know what that looks like. So my father had like, you know, like just working around, you know, the N-word, right? Like, you know, like my father's like, what fight was in school this morning, like this day, like this week? Were you involved? I was like, absolutely not. Did you get blamed? So he knew that you don't have to be involved to get blamed. My mom's like, let me go to school and fight the other kids. I'm like, you can't do that, Mom. That's not like, this is not a good look for me. You know what I mean? But then my mom was more like, who said it? Let's go. Right. And my dad's like, no. So race was in there, but it could have been there. It could also been something if you had freckles or if you were, he had big ears, so like it was all of those things, right? But my father, in terms of a quarterbacking race, he just did it from 30,000 feet, never sort of, this guy said that, oh, let's go up and, do something about it,
Okay.
It was very different approaches.
My second part of that question was actually, how is it being raised in the Samuelsson family? And it was funny because there was a funny thing when we first became friends.
Yeah.
As soon as people would see Marcus Samuelsson as a friend on my Facebook, I would get all these direct messages. And I remember a couple of times I screenshot them and sent them to your text message. Oh, I'm Marcus's cousin. Can you tell me how to get a hold of him? Or, I'm Marcus's brother. Like, okay, well then contact Marcus.
That you have.
Marcus Lewis is Marcus's friend. Like, and at that time we wasn't as tight as we are today. But at that time it's just like, wow, okay. So, you kind of captured into it, what it is bringing the Samuelsson home and, having different education that you did per week and so on and so forth like that. So you kind of just took me out of that.
But we had, our house, you asked me that question, right? So our family is just like any family, right? Like, first of all, I would say the base of our family is poverty. Okay. You don't think about Sweden as a poor country. My grandparents were extremely poor. 7th grade education for my grandfather, 5th grade education for my grandmother. So not being poor, but coming out of poverty, that is our family. My father was the first one to go to college in his village, and then eventually university and get a PhD. So he's both. He's of poverty, but he's also of white collar. So understanding both, right? And so race it's there, but these are the first things I would say. And then also we had a lot of diversity within the family. My cousins were Koreans, also adopted. My auntie was Jewish. My other cousins were French Canadian. So, our parents were white and all of this, but it was a very mixed. It could be a New York dinner table circa 2020, right? Yeah. That's the structure of our family. But then also we had other people in our family that I think rounded out this family very well. My uncle was an alcoholic. And I say that with dignity. Do you know what I mean? He was a functioning alcoholic. And that allowed us to see another side that we didn't, as kids, that we didn't know what that struggle was, right? True. So those were the things that when I think about our family, that's what I think about. Us being Black, I think about much later as being a teenager or coming to age and going into elevators in the cities and like seeing like the ladies holding tighter to their bag or being hard at getting a job. And I'm like, I don't want your bag. Like, do you know what I mean? Like those, but growing up, it was like, oh, my uncle got into, my father had to leave the house and go pick up my uncle, and it was 1 o'clock in the morning, and why is my father doing that? And my older sister was like, don't worry about it, go back to bed. Those were the type of things that gave me like, oh, we're a family. We have room enough for the odd, for the beautiful, for the great, and for the misfit. And that's what makes us a family.
True.
One of the questions I have related to that is, did you ever think and dream or fantasize in your mind? I used to tell people that Harry Belafonte and Elizabeth Montgomery were my birth parents.
Oh yeah, good choice.
There were two, right?
You're so vain.
Hey, these are the people I saw on TV that could have maybe made the combo of me. So, right? So, and I actually told Mr. Belafonte that, and he like leaned in and he was like, where did you grow up?
Right.
I said, New England. He said, I spent a lot of time in Newport. I was like, yay. Anyway, we do have a resemblance. All that to say that I used to fantasize about who my birth family was and what it would have been like. I used to actually think they were going to come and pick me up from school one day, just because we didn't talk about adoption that much, and there was this idea there's another family out there. Did you ever think about that other family, and did you ever put yourself in that family and think about how would my life be different there versus in this family?
No. Not in that sense. I thought about it once I met them, but up until then, I was just busy being a kid and like trying to beat my sisters at something. I was the youngest. I never beat my sisters at anything, and just trying to get ahead. And we were drilled, like, you know, I take maybe like, I don't know, maybe 100 pictures a day or something like that, right? And I've always done that since I was 3 years old. And what I mean, like, me and my sisters going to the store was like literally like a mini celebrity trip. And my mom's like, this lady, she's like tall, maybe 5'10", just fighting off neighbors for us getting to the store because they just never seen our hair. They wanted to touch our hair. They wanted to see, you know, all this stuff, right? So that's not necessarily racism, that's curiosity. We've never seen anything like that. And I just remember my mom, like, just basically arguing with neighbors for us going to the store and like taking pictures and doing all these different things. So we were doing a lot of that stuff. Then also, we were in a mix. Like, my mom gave us a lot of confidence, like that balance between arrogance and confidence. But she knew we needed an extraordinary amount of confidence to leave the house, right? Just to get through school. Okay. So she over-pumped us with that information. And my father gave us a lot of humility, right? Like when we went from the city, we grew up in the city of Gothenburg during the school year. And then every summer, school's out, we went to the countryside, to the fishing village. And basically 30 minutes before we got to the village, my dad always took a break, took us out. And he's like, listen, nobody wants to know about, like, the city value proposition you have doesn't matter no more. You're going to the country now. You need to know how to fix a boat. Nobody cares about if the new Beat It video with Michael Jackson is good or not. No one has cable out here. Nobody cares about if you got new Converse or not. Like, he always was very specific about it. You know-how, the city know-how is very different than the island know-how. Like, do you remember how to tie a boat? This is how you clean the boat the fastest way. Like, pure skills, how to survive on an island. Okay. So those are the skills that we were trained around. And in the beginning, every summer, you're off a little bit, right? That gives you enough humility to whatever smirk you have on your face, it's off. And you're always cold because you're working in the water and you're doing stuff. So like, they were very much yin and yang, but we were always connected to labor, and poverty was just around the corner. Okay. It did never really enter our world, but it was just around the corner.
So all of that takes me to a very central question to all this, and central to all of us, which is, it sounds like all of these things have contributed to the core of your identity and answering this question of who am I? So how have you navigated that in terms of it? In terms of that internal inquisition of like, who am I? How have you come to just be so settled? It sounds like your parents contributed a great deal to that, but what are the other factors that has contributed to that, like knowing who you are?
I think it's a long journey, right? The first, that is a big thing, is that allowed me to go after my passion. A lot of people, most people I know, have a job, but they're not passionate about their job. It pays their bills, it makes them function. But then they might have yoga, or they might have, boxing or whatever. They have a hobby. Your world is fashion and style and people. You would work with it whether you would get paid or not. That's like, you know what I mean? That's a calling. Like, I was allowed to go become a chef. So that took a lot of my, like, I actually don't know who I am without, if you take the chefing out of me, I wouldn't know who I would be, right? And I say that with, so that allowed me to find my identity, right? One of the blessings of being Black and being adopted and being an immigrant is that you have to be the best. So it gives you a clear choice of what you have to do. Yeah. And I say that with a lot of humility too, because since just being Black, people put one type of ceiling on us, right? Then being an immigrant, you're always a little bit like you're lost in translation. And then being an adopted added another level of where do I belong, right? So all of those are borderline, could tip over to insecurity, right? My identity through my work has allowed me to build up confidence to match that, right? So when I'm in Ethiopia, although I look like an Ethiopian, I'm still a Ferengi. Ferengi is like the foreigner, right? I'm the American, I'm the European, I am the Ferengi. So culturally, I still don't know, in Ethiopian weddings, you eat certain foods, you dance certain tribe dances, and I don't know all the different tribe dances, so I'm lost in translation. When I worked in Switzerland or France, I was European still, but I was not of Swiss or French culture. On top of that, I was black, so I was clearly on the outside looking in. And even the identity work of being, Louis is African American, and I'm African and American. That's just slight different, right? That you really have to think through the nuances of that, right? And so that it all comes through my work. And I can give you a last example. So when I committed to say I'm going to build Red Rooster, because for me, it's a love letter back to African-American culture. That's what it is. But just because I'm black didn't mean that I knew anything of that. So knowing that I did not know enough about it, I said, okay, I can't do this from Midtown, from a convenient apartment where I lived.
Right.
I have to move. And I moved 2003. And, I went to Schaumburg. I talked to Lana Turner. I talked to, I looked at Gordon Parks' photography. I talked to Dawood Bey. I talked to the church lady. So my work, my PhD was those 7 or 8 years before we opened the restaurant, because blackness would give me a door in, but it wouldn't give me a door out. So it was my work that would give me the door out. So I never doubt, and that's the blessings of being an immigrant, is that you don't know.
That's right.
Like my uncle does not come from South Carolina and came here through the migration. My uncle did not go to Vietnam. My uncle have not had to go through police harassment and staying upstate, right? Which everyone in this room shares or knows somebody that has, right? So if that's not my path, I need to understand that path. And the only way to do that is through moving and learning and humbly learn.
You're so, obviously, moving this conversation in exactly the direction we want to take it. And I know Lou had a question about moving into the business aspect of your identity, and you've answered some of that, but I know you had a question about naming businesses and things of that nature, and when
Well, so I know that you have, 36 restaurants now, and 90 more to come within the next 2 months. And 2 parts to that. Well, it's going to be a couple of parts. When was the first Marcus restaurant made? Because that was my question I really wanted to know. Because I was with you at Oxy, and with you at other place, but what's your first Marcus?
I think running that mackerel stand in Sweden when I was a kid, getting the mackerel, learning how to smoke them with my uncle. My mom screaming, don't drink his coffee. And I'm like, I'm 12, I'm not drinking coffee. Knowing now that it was a spiked coffee in there. But like getting some pieces to yourself, figuring out what dressing to put on top, selling it, making your own coin. I think that idea that I fished it that morning, we cured it and smoked it, and that afternoon, I got my own pocket money. That was an incredible, whoa, that can happen. And I got more pocket money if my mackerel was better than the other guy, right?
Okay.
When I knew that I would go to Japan, I was 17. In Sweden, you have to drive when you're 18. You have a driving license when you're 18. I set up my catering company because I knew I had to go. I'm going to Japan. And my dad outed me. He's like, I know you're doing catering across town. How are you getting there? It's not with the bus. You're not going by bus. I know that. No one is doing catering on the bus. And I'm like, no, I hired Peter. Peter's like the oldest dude I knew. He was like 23. He drove me back and forth and we did these gigs. And my dad's like, you're moving too fast. You're moving too fast. There's something you're doing. I don't know what you're doing, but I'm gonna find out. And that's like what I knew. I had to get a partner. And I said, Peter, you're not the driver anymore. You're not partners in this right now. So Peter had to come home, and meet my dad. And he was like, Peter 23 is like scared. It's like, it's my car, he's doing this, and it was legit. So we had to like, my dad did an audit on our company. You know what I mean? So it was always around, you know, Peter took his money and went to town. I took my money and saved it up to Japan. Okay. You know what I mean? So I think those were always, and I think blackness is such an incredible driver. It's such a luxury because if you channel blackness right, it is such an incredible motivator, right? I remember being in France and working in the highest end kitchen, 3-star Michelin. My roommate, this kid was one wonderful American kid, tall, blonde, beautiful kid. And he was so upset every day, like about the work that we had to do. And he said, I'm gonna go to the boss. My dad didn't send me here for me to peel tomatoes. And I said, yo, whatever you do, don't go to the boss. This is not good. Do you see the line up the door every day? Those are all kids our age that are begging to work here for free. You don't have leverage, please don't do it. Of course, next day he went to work. A day later, I had a new roommate, right? Just like boom. And I'm like, your threshold for pain is that? And mine was like, this isn't even like, this is not even humiliating, do you know what I mean? And that's when I started to realize that if you channel and power blackness the right way, it can be the most important engine. And I think that's ultimately why people live in fear of inclusion and diversity. They are very much motivated. They know the power in that, right? That you come from this place and you can create that. We could never fathom anyone to create that, right? And that's why I think where the fear comes from. It comes from that.
So you know what? I'm actually going to come from that next question because I was going to ask you what ultimately motivated you to put your name, Marcus, on a building and say, this is my restaurant. Marcus BP, Marcus this, Marcus Oxtail, everything. So what ultimately made you do that?
I think I waited for a long time, and I think it's end of the day.
So 20 years, right?
Yeah, I think it's about, we live in a time now where branding and click and strategy is so important. So just simplify the process, right? And I wanted to do something that was also very, you know, I didn't want it to be like Pink Bird or like Violet Bird. I didn't want anything close to branding wise.
Okay.
So it was just from an identity point of view. It was important to do something that also brand wise is different and feels different. But, you know, that came later because I think we all can have ownership in things. And as Black people, we have to learn about it a lot. You can take ownership in something without you owning it, right? Because that comes down to pride and work ethic, right? So I didn't feel like the name made it that I owned it more or less. I never associated that with one.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so I had another question. It says, how has it been for you in terms of understanding building your racial identity?
It's really, for me, compartmentalized in a couple of different buckets. I think in Ethiopia, being an Ethiopian is so much of what I look like, but also it's that last leg that obviously my wife has given me so much in that, and my extended family, but that is an identity that I still don't know all the things about, right? I still feels like, you know, a Swedish guy going to an all-black wedding, you know, and then it's dancing time. You're a little bit off, right? You're like this. But I welcome that challenge, and I enjoy learning about that, about the holidays and about the tradition. The power of being Black, we spend so much time assimilating, and now I'm much more on the power of being Black, the advantages, the opportunities, the connecting tissues that it can drive. And very often I start, especially speaking to kids, I start a lot with the blessings of being Black, which is just words that a lot of young Black men and young Black ladies too maybe haven't heard before, but really taking the power of that and thinking about how does that fit to her or him. And I think the work it's a big relay, right? Like we got the baton from the blessings of the civil rights movement, right? And now it's up to us to figure out what do we do it, how do we pass it on? So that work is really, really important. But it's also about seeing the humanity, and that is even more important than race first. You know, sometimes I think we can do better a job of like humanity and race second, actually.
Okay.
I know, Lou, you had a question about, and you mentioned Maya. So I think let's go to your question about the family you've built today. And you had some questions about Maya and Zion, and how that...
Shucks. Well, thank you for getting me off my page. So again, having such a beautiful family, and I witnessed that this morning at the swing set with Maya and Zion falling asleep on the swing, and then seeing a lady with a watermelon skirt and being attracted to food. So bringing that question up, how significant has it been to create your family unit? And when did you realize having a family was something you wanted?
I think as a creative, for me, it took a long time because I just didn't know how I would fit it in. You know, when you're a chef, for me, it's very hard to compartmentalize all the business, the creativity, the off life, all of it. I've never been good at figuring that out. I've just been working. Okay. And it was just wonderful to meet Maya and seeing that guard come down, and then even opening the door to that's possible. And obviously, being lucky enough to have Zion has taken it to a whole new other dimension, you know. And I also feel blessed on living on a block. I feel like Zion has like 15 uncles and aunties, right? That, you know, we live in a big city, but Harlem is a village. Yes. And I just feel very lucky and blessed that, you know, when I lived in Midtown, it was very anonymous. And it was okay. I was a single guy. I lived by myself. I didn't speak to my neighbor, and my neighbor didn't speak to me. It wasn't her fault. It was more, in Midtown. Sure. Harlem is the opposite of that. We're all in each other's business all the time.
Probably make you speak to us.
But I love that. Okay. Right? I love, like, I know I'm going to the coffee shop and Dart's going to be there. He's coming from the gym. Or, you know, if Zion runs in front of the store, even when he's 12, 13, you're going to watch him and be like, hey, man, that's not the right thing to do. And you can grab him. Like, where I grew up in my village, you know, when you grow up on an island, everybody becomes your uncle and aunties, because when the rough weather comes in, you can grab any kid, take them in until the weather has passed, and then they drive you to your home. Like, so you have to say who your parents were, and they drove you home. You call your parents. If you would do that today, you would be a kidnapper. Right. But like, I feel if someone would grab Zion because he was running in the street or doing something wrong, I want my aunties and uncles to reprimand him, because it's going to be needed, not only from Maya and myself. It's going to come from all of us, right? Correct. So that is the luxury of living in Harlem, that, yeah, we're on a, you know, we're getting faster in terms of communication, but the breakdown of normal communication is also a lost art form. So I hope when people are still sitting on the stoop in Harlem, I always smile. When people are, even if the neighbors are arguing, at least they're talking. And I love that. And I hope that never change, regardless who our new neighbor's gonna be. That you engage, you know what I mean? I hope Bevy will, you know, correct Zion, you know, because he's too loud or whatever it is, right? I hope, you know, I can't wait for Sidra to take him to her studio, and all these blessings that we have, right? We have each other, you know?
So that brings us to what I want to talk. There's two more things we want to do. One is talk about our Harlem, the Audible project that you're working on, because that is really the, and then I want you to start thinking about the last question, and both of you, which is what adoption can teach the world. So that's coming up for you, Lou, and then you, Marcus. But for now, I want to make sure that everybody knows about that Our Harlem project, because it's so important. And you alluded to it right now, which is so important, but I want to know more.
When Audible came with this opportunity to do a long-form podcast, a digital cookbook, I jumped at it right away because I wanted to. Part of why, as Black people, we are behind in hospitality is because the authorship of our contribution is gone, right? And you really have to seek to find the authorship of what we contributed to American food. And it's just a lot of stigma. We came out of domestic. When we invented something, it stayed with the master and so on, right? Whether that was whiskey or barbecue or whatever. Our ambitions was only kept to one type of cooking, which although our narratives were plurethals, right? So this was an opportunity to not just document it, but document it in a digital form. So 30 years from now, if you're gonna Google it, it's still gonna be there, right? And the other part that I want to show was that I didn't build this. I had a lot of doubts. I didn't know, there's a lot of wrongs. I had a tribe of people that helped me build this, right? So when you hear the Lana story, then when she brought me into Black Excellence and she held classical music performance for kids in our brownstone, that's a level of neighborhood, but also a level of excellence and the gifts of Harlem. Like, people come to our Monday nights and think, when they see Gloria and Rakim, and think that that's always been like that. No, it took a lot of trials and errors. And there's a lot of trials and errors that happen. So I just wanted to show that you can build something magical, but be off, and it takes you a long time. But if you spread it out and bring in other stakeholders into it, you can come out on the other end in a much broader way. And I think we have 40 people that speak on our Harlem. We could have brought another 40. So hopefully it inspires and it adds to the conversation of authorship, of Black excellence. I look very much at Black music, because African Americans' music contribution to the world is so well documented. Even art, right? When I look at what Thelma is building, but food, it's kind of vague. And with what's happening in Harlem right now, with the restaurants that are opening and the identities that comes out of that, we're building that brick house so food and Blackness does not have to have a stigma. It takes a long time, but you can look at someone like Dapper Dan and be inspired that he did it, they took it away from him, but he just stayed at it, and eventually his moment came back.
Yeah, so good, thank you. And thank you for that project, because I think the world needs to know about it. And so, the world, Lou, after this conversation, the conversations we've had leading up to this podcast, what do you think adoption can teach the world? And then Marcus, I'm gonna ask you the same question.
So if you want to be honest, let's just go with what we talked about. A lot of folks here that I invited today are people that are close to me that really didn't know what happened with me in 6th grade. I actually fathered a son. His name is Terrence, and he was adopted at birth. And I was in Terrence's life because the adoption system back in the 70s and 80s was so totally different than now. And it wasn't until actually Kyle and April sat back and educated me. I was actually told that my child would not know about me, that I was his father, not a friend to his parents' family, that he'd be told at 18. By that time, I'd moved here to New York, and I went to public library on 42nd Street, and I listed myself for being a non-published person, but to be able to be found. I put full Louis Ronald Nehemiah Johnson Jr., February 9th, I put this all down for this young man to find me, and to this day, he has not. But it wasn't until, leading up to this date and us getting together to have this conversation that I really found out. I love the adoption. That's one, because of my cousin Tony Shellman, who actually couldn't make it in today. But just also, I got so much education now at 51, almost 52 years old about adoption that I've never known in my whole entire life. And I had to live these years with a child in the adoption placement. I was told that he was going to be told at 18 so that he'd be able to find me. That has not happened. But then April educated me on some other things that it was untrue, And so I've learned the then and the now. And I think I love the now better than the then, because I still have not found my child. But
That's beautiful.
That's pretty much all I can really take away from it. It's just,
wow.
I fell in love with adoption more. Now I did order the DNA test. So I'm going to be doing a DNA testing soon to see if I can find my child.
Nice. Wow. Well, good luck on the journey. And
Thank you.
I think what I love about adoption for me in many ways is ahead of the game, because I think that we are now learning about other family structures, right? Mm-hmm. And what I can tell you is that people are dying out of loneliness, out of a lack of love, whether it's drugs or medication, part of that mix, whether people come back from wars, whatever it is, right? We have to have a more loving society. That's not a Republican or a Democrat. You can't argue that's not a black or white issue. Mm-hmm. We can all agree on that. Families are needed, support is needed, love is needed. And adoption taught us that a non-traditional way of creating a family. And if you think about that in civil rights movement, but you also think about that through gay rights movement, for example, we're learning new structure of family. And that is so important, but adoption has sort of kind of done that for a long time. Mm-hmm. So it allowed us to look at a new different structure of family. And adoption also one of these things where you can be super conservative, but maybe you're adopted. So there's actually, anytime you have something that everybody can get around the table and say like, how can I help? And there's stakeholders from every place. I think that's a good place. And I think adoption has brought people to that concept, across race, religion, country, whatever it is. And because there's so many things that I think collectively that we have to rethink. And we've spent so much time hurting each other. I'm like, what is that about, right? And when you look at how many people now, as black people, we thought about the crack epidemic that really hit our communities, and now you think about the heroin and the oxy that hitting America's communities. And I'm not saying adoption is the solution to that. I'm just saying love and families and taking care of one another does not have to be in a traditional setting as we think about it. And it's always amazing to me why some people are so deeply invested of what other family structures should look like. Like, wouldn't we all be better off that the more families that we have, that people have support to one another? Who cares if they got two mothers or a black father and a white father or whatever the structure? I'm never invested. The fact that you have neighbors, I'm not invested how their family structure looks like. I just want to know who my neighbors are. You know what I mean?
No, it's so true, and this is a great note to end the podcast. I think this conversation reminds me of a few things that adoption can teach the world. The first is whether they're reminding us of our most embarrassing moments, family is the center of our gravity. And it takes patience, love, and open minds to really realize today's families and what's going on with them. The second is that really honoring family as we think about National Adoption Month, and adoption is really all about family, means we have to acknowledge all of it, the gains, the losses, the complexity, the beauty. And that really rounds out our ability to celebrate family and adoption. And the third thing is, and this is the most powerful in my opinion that has come from this exchange and this conversation, is that adoption connects more of us than we think.
Yeah.
And then when you open up the dialogue, I would have been satisfied to have had that conversation with you, Lou, and that where it would end. If Marcus said, nah, I can't do the podcast, I can't do it. That moment was so remarkable to me, and having the ability to share that with you and for there to be a deeper connecting of our hearts really just it solidifies my point, is that when we talk and we're open and we're vulnerable, right, and we share, there's an impact that ripples out into the world. So I feel just beyond blessed that the world will hear this conversation, that we brought our full selves to it, with no barriers, with no filters, and with real grace and courage. So I love you both. I appreciate you. I appreciate everyone that was here to share in this conversation.
Thank you.
And happy Thanksgiving, everyone.
And thank you to you, April, for setting the table. And thank you for you, Lou, for sharing. Beautiful. Very nice. Thank you.
This episode was recorded at Ginny's Supper Club in Harlem, produced by Quam Green and myself, engineered and edited by Quam Green. Our theme music was composed by Josh Blum and Xander Riedel. It was produced by Lorenzo Wolf and recorded at Restoration Sound in Brooklyn, New York. I'm your host, April Dinwoodie. Please help us spread the word by subscribing, sharing, writing a review, and rating the show. You can follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, @JuneandApril, or reach me at aprildinwoodie.com. To see video highlights of this podcast and other episodes, visit my April Dinwoodie channel on YouTube. If you or your organization or company or brand are interested in becoming a sponsor, please email me at bornjuneraised@gmail.com. That's bornjuneraised@gmail.com.